The time has come for the Cobra to rise up and reveal himself.
Welcome back, my quiver of capitalists, to AP Economics, presented by Cobranomics, the all-American history teacher, gold standard of economics, le champion of classical liberalism, and your sensei of supply side, Professor G here. And today we are going to take a look at Unit 4, Lesson 5, Keynesian Fiscal Policy and the Keynesian Response to the Great Depression, and all of Keynes's graphs and math to show how a government should respond to depressionary circumstances. So for today, we are going to go back to 1933 and take a look at how John Maynard Keynes, the founder of our course, explains to FDR the situation and how America has to get out of that situation. So, 1933, FDR is elected and FDR promises a new deal, but he has to call the founder of our course, the Stalin and profiling, John Maynard Keynes. FDR calls John Maynard Keynes, says, "Slick Johnny, I need you here in the States now." John Maynard Keynes says, "FDR, Franklin, Delano, Roosevelt, I'm coming. Limousine riding to Heathrow Airport, jet flying to United States of America, Stalin and profiling down the aisle to the president's office." And John Maynard Keynes, the Baron, says to Franklin D. Roosevelt, "Here's the situation. What we have here, that old model isn't good. We need the new full employment graph. Long-run aggregate supply, Space Mountain, where we should be. And we have aggregate supply and aggregate demand, where we are. And in the 1920s, we were, the roaring 20s, we were exactly where we should be. But then, the series of the stock market crash, the Dust Bowl, the banking crisis from 1929 to 1933, a third of the banks of America are going to go out of business. And year after year after year, the Great Depression is going to get worse. And we're going to have in America and around the world, in England, in France, we have this massive decrease in aggregate demand. And we have that recessionary gap, that massive decrease in spending. Consumer spending, savings gone, jobs destroyed, 25% unemployment. And the economy is not recovering on its own. And it's not recovering on its own because as people are spending less, you have prices are coming down. And as prices are decreasing, the short-run ability to produce, the ability and willingness to produce is also decreasing as well. And now we have that massive recessionary gap. The GDP is way below where it should be. People are suffering. So FDR says, "John Maynard, what do we do?" And Keynes says, "We have to use the power of fiscal policy to push the economy, not replace capitalism, push the economy in the right direction. And remember, aggregate demand consists of consumer spending, government spending, investment spending, and net exports. We can't focus on, and that government spending, and that government, remember a circular flow model. We have households in the product market. Households give businesses money in exchange for goods and services, but that's not happening. And businesses hire households in the factor market in exchange for wages. And we have the government in the middle. And this is where we need to use the power of the government. Because the government gives services, collects taxes, and in return gives services, goods and services to households and business, and can act as an employer of households, can act as a business, employing households, giving households money. And Keynes says we can't rely on investment spending because during the Roaring '20s, investment spending was already at its height. We have all the factories. America was running on all cylinders. Businesses aren't going to start doing more investment spending. That's already there, and it's sitting there. We can't focus on aggregate supply side economics, because we can't trust the animal spirit of business. While a decrease in aggregate supply would improve, increase in aggregate supply would improve the economy, while investment spending would improve the economy, in survival mode, we cannot trust the animal spirit of business. We have to go with what we can predict, what we can predict numerically. And what we can predict numerically here is the consumer. We can predict consumer spending, and we can mathematically predict consumer spending, and we can mathematically predict the multiplied impact that an increase in government spending to households, employing households, giving relief benefits, that initial spending will go around and around, and around the circular flow model, what is called the multiplier effect. The multiplier effect, an initial increase in government spending focused on increasing the disposable income of consumers, on shovel-ready infrastructure projects, on relief, will generate an increase in income, and consumers will spend that income in the product market, getting $600 alligator shoes. That person will then have another job, and their income will change, and then they'll go and get custom-made suits, and then then more income will flow through and change more income, and then they'll go get a Rolex or custom shades, and that money will go around and around and around the circular flow model in what are called rounds. But we need that initial increase in government spending, that fiscal policy, and we cannot do it with raising taxes. We have to do deficit spending, because it's going to take a massive amount of money, but responsible deficit spending, because it's going to take a massive amount of money to shift, especially in a depressionary situation, aggregate demand back to the right. So now let's take a look at the math at how all this is going to work. So now we have the consumption function. the basis of Keynesian economics. And what the consumption function says is that all people first spend a certain amount of their income. Let's call this the average propensity to consume. Out of every dollar we spend, out of every dollar we earn, of income we earn, we spend a certain percentage of that dollar, average propensity to consume. And we also save a certain percentage of that dollar. So out of every dollar we have, we could either, let's say, spend 75 cents and save 25 cents. But the number that we are not most interested in, because remember, Keynesian economics is about changing people's disposable income. And in the consumption function, what this shows us is that as income increases, consumption will increase as well. This is called the marginal propensity to consume. Marginal being change, propensity being likeliness, and consumption, spending. So as income increases, how much of that change in income will we spend? And if the government can effectively use fiscal policy to employ people, and that money goes around and around and around the circular flow model with more people getting employed and more incomes increasing, then that initial change in spending will have a multiplied impact on total real GDP. And now the question is, mathematically, how much of an impact will it have? So, let's take a look at the government spending multiplier, which equals 1 over MPS, marginal propensity to save, or 1 over 1 minus MPC. Because same thing, out of every dollar, you could either only consume more, consume, or spend. So again, MPC plus MPS must always equal 1. Another one of Keynes's always rules, and Keynes is always right, especially in AP economics. So remember that too, little always rule for you. MPC plus MPS always equals 1. Jot that down. So, what does this mean? Let's say we know that if people's income increases, that people will spend, let's say 0.75, 75% of just that increase in income. Let's plug that number into our formula. So let's say we know for our multiplier effect. So let's say we know the MPC equals 0.75. Again, that means people will spend 75% of every new dollar they earn. So let's plug it into our formula. 1 over 1 minus 0.75. 1 over 0.25, times that by 100 over 100 to make that a real whole number. Equals 4. What does that number 4 mean? That number 4 means that any initial government spending and increase in G will have a 4-fold multiplied impact on total real GDP as that money goes around and around and around, as that spending rather goes around and around and around the circular flow model. So that means if the government spends $10 billion and we know people's MPC is 0.75. That means we know that $10 billion, that means we could deficit spend responsibly, because that $10 billion will have a multiplied impact that government spending, that initial government spending of $10 billion, as it changes people's income, makes them employed. And they go and spend money. And then the next person spends money. And then the next person's income improves. And they spend money. That will have an actual impact of $40 billion. And this also means now that we can deficit spend responsibly. Let's take a look at how.